This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 133 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's topic is, I reckon, a really cool one. It's all about the big trips that changed everything. You know, sometimes you have a trip in your life that really changes the direction of where you're going in life, or, you know, gives you a rethink about how you're going to, spend the rest of your life, or something happens, you meet someone, anything that really changes. Without that trip, your life would be very different. I've got just two guests today because their stories were long but wonderful. I'm going to be talking to Dean about a very important hiking trip to California, and to Seng about a month he spent in India. So we'll get to them soon. But my turn first. So often when I think about the big trips that changed everything, I tend to talk about traveling to Europe as a 9-year-old with my family. We spent 6 months there, and that definitely changed my perspective on the world and taught me a lot. But if I really think about like a big trip that really changed how my life progressed, it's probably more than anything a trip I went to with my school in I was 14, so I was in grade 10 here in Australia, the 10th grade. And I spent a month in Germany, I want to say about 20 other kids aged, 14 to 16, and 2 of our German teachers. And we spent 4 weeks traveling around Germany. We spent, a bit over a week in 3 different places, staying with host families, going to different schools. It was absolutely life-changing. It really was the big trip that changed everything. I guess, if I think about it, it was kind of like a double whammy. There was... I was 14, I was just becoming an independent person. I'd started to be a bit more independent at home. I'd been working in a fast food store, part-time while I was at school to save money for that trip, in fact. Things like that. So I'd started to become, not just a kid anymore, but also being there in a foreign country and living with different people who, spoke a different language and saw life in different ways. And particularly in Berlin, I lived with a family who the father was from West Berlin, the mother was from East Berlin. And it was incredibly lucky timing. I was there for October the 3rd, 1990, which if you're a good historian, you'll know that was the reunification day when West and East Germany became Germany again. And I was there at Brandenburger Tor, at Brandenburg Gate in Berlin with this family, and for whom the reunification of East and West Germany was, so important. And just sort of witnessing amazing life-changing events like that really made me think about, the bigger place of the world and how I wanted to not just stay home in Australia and have a normal life. I wanted to do something different. Interestingly, though, when I got home, I think going back to normal life and the influence of school it sort of beat that out of me. I had all these plans and things I was going to do, and I was going to be a writer and, change the world. But school and the teachers that you can't be a writer, you have to have a real job. I ended up studying maths at university, which, I haven't really used in my career since. And I think I'd like to say I was right. Back in my school days, I wanted to be a writer or a teacher or both. And now I'm really both, just in a different way. So that trip to Germany was so life-changing, but it took a while to really get the benefit out of it. So I think that, even though I then, tried to be a normal person, so to speak, and do a normal career and, do something sensible like studying maths, there was always this part of me that knew that wasn't what I wanted to do. And throughout my early 20s, I was constantly trying to find ways to leave Perth and pursue something a bit different. I applied for different kind of schemes. I nearly ended up in the Solomon Islands. I nearly ended up in Cambodia, all kinds of things. I did end up in Newman in Western Australia for a while and in Adelaide in South Australia for a while. But finally, at age 25, when I moved to Japan, basically I got to finally fulfill that idea that I'd had when I was 14. And that's, was the next big trip that changed everything. But I really think without that month in Germany, the more I think about it, then I don't know if I ever would have had that real need to get out and see the world and to recognize that I could kind of do whatever I wanted. So that for me, I think, is the big trip that changed everything. And in a minute, we're going to hear about Dean's trip that changed everything. But first, I have to mention the sponsor for today's show is Travel Journal School. So that's my online learning portal where you can learn all kinds of stuff to help you remember your travels better. And the next course is coming up in mid-April. It's a 2-week course and it's about starting a personal travel blog. So it'll help you set up a free blog using WordPress. You'll learn how to post pictures, text, links and all of that, how to share it with your family and friends so that they can follow your travels. And of course, I'll also have lots of important tips on how to best write a travel blog post so that it's a really good one and everyone will be just hanging out to read the next one. So if you are curious about either the Start a Personal Travel blog course or other Travel Journal School courses that are coming up, you can sign up for the waitlist at traveljournalschool.com. So please do, because the last course we ran in January was so successful. We had so many interesting people from everywhere around the world improving their journal writing skills. We had so much fun. So do come along and join us. So on to my first guest today. It is Dean O'Shea, and he tells us about a big trip to California that did change everything for lots of different reasons. It's a really interesting story.
Probably the most life-changing trip that I ever did was when I went to hike the Pacific Crest Trail in California.
Wow, cool.
So if you've ever seen the film Wild, that's what it's about, basically. It's a 2,650-mile hike through the wildernesses of the western US. And, often your days from any towns or any people, really. So you've got to be very careful about food and water supplying. Often you'll be lugging a big heavy bag around with you, and it's tough. It's tough. It's tough physically, and it's very tough mentally. I think there's a statistic of about 200 people attempt to through hike it a year, and 60% of them never finish.
Wow.
So it's pretty tough. So here's me, just graduated from university, been in education for the last 20 years. And I'm like, I need to get out of here. I need an adventure. What's the most difficult thing that you can possibly do?
Oh, no.
So I actually looked it up in a book my mum had called 501 Journeys, and I picked it because it was the longest journey.
Nothing like a challenge.
Nothing like a challenge, right? So that was kind of like my proving, as it were. So I set off with a bag full of dreams, arrived in San Diego to start the hike. And immediately started failing at everything. I couldn't find the gear that I wanted. I couldn't find the buses that I wanted. Everything was just like going wrong all from the outset. But it was kind of during those times when I realized that the only person that I had to rely on was me. And the only persons my actions had any consequences for were me. So I kind of learned to stop beating myself up a bit for everything that I did wrong. Eventually, this is after a couple of weeks. So I started the hike, and it was tough. My bag was too heavy. I was underprepared. There were times when I ran out of water and had to eat cactus. There were times when I got attacked by rattlesnakes. I never actually got bitten, but I had to run away a few times. Met some amazing people along the way. You generally meet 1 or 2 people a day, maybe hike along with them for a little bit.
Wow.
And so it had come to about 10 days in, I think, and my whole body was like aching and sore. I had blisters everywhere. My bag was too heavy. And it had gotten really, really difficult emotionally as well, with the isolation and with, constantly just having to push through all of these barriers and these difficulties. So I came to this beautiful meadow in this place called the San Ysidro Creek. And it's the first real place because the Southern California from the border of Mexico is quite barren. So you're effectively walking through deserts for the first part of the hike. So I came across this beautiful valley. And is this tiny little creek surrounded by trees and then surrounded by these beautiful meadows full of flowers. So I decided to take a break and kind of rethink this epic 6-month hike that I was attempting. And 10 days in, I was already ready to give up.
Oh, gosh.
I kind of just like stayed there for about a week and in this beautiful place, kind of contemplating what I wanted to do. And I basically decided that I wouldn't continue on the hike anymore because it was not what I thought it would be. I thought that I wanted the challenge, but actually really I enjoyed more the scenery and just like being in the place.
Right.
And the hiking 20 miles a day with a 25 kilogram backpack on was actually my least favorite part of it. And that was the thing that I had to do all day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I kind of cut my losses and was ready to leave when this kind of late middle-aged couple came into this place where I was camping, and they said hi, as some people do. And they said, "Hi, are you Dean?" And I was like, "Yes." They're like, "Are you Dean O'Shea?" I was like, "Yeah. How do you know who I am?"
Wow.
And they said, "Yeah. So your mum's been trying to get a hold of you. She said it's really urgent."
Oh my gosh.
And so there are these things on the Pacific Crest there are these people on the Pacific Crest Trail called trail angels, and what they do is they look after people on the trail. They put water out in places where there's no water, and and these people had come. Basically, my mum had got a hold of the association, and they'd kind of pass messages along, and eventually these people had found me.
Wow.
So I was like, whoa, like, what could this be? Like, this sounds really serious. So I packed up my camp and I hiked into the nearest civilization, which was about a day's walk. And it was just this little golf ranch, called, Warner Springs. Mm-hmm. And then I went online, started talking to all my friends, trying to get hold of my mum because I didn't really have a mobile phone. And then eventually got through to my mum and got her to call the reception of the place where I was at. So finally get a hold of my mum, and then she told me that my dad had died.
Oh, my goodness.
Like, all of a sudden, just have a heart attack. Oh. And so, yeah, was completely devastated.
Wow.
Like, broke down, on the floor in the lobby of this place. Very emotional. And then, I had to get home.
Oh my gosh.
So, problem was I was literally in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but myself to rely on. So it took me about a week to get home in the end. I had to hitchhike, to barter for hotels, I got trains, planes. I think I got about 4 different planes in the end.
Wow.
And eventually I got home about a week later. But that was, was one of the most difficult weeks of my life.
Oh, I bet. You poor thing.
Yeah, and it was just one of those experiences where you suddenly realize when you're put in a situation like that you are the only person that you have really to rely on. And if you don't do it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
So, as horrible as that experience was for me, I can appreciate how it, made me the person I am today. Taught me self-reliance, self-resilience, and really when the chips are down, like when you need to get something done, then you can just get it done. And I'm so grateful to everyone as well who helped me along the way, people that I hitchhiked with, people that I stayed with, people who were just generally really nice to me.
Yeah, I think that whole kindness of strangers thing is often the case, especially in a situation like that where you really need them. Then people, like 99.9% of the people you ever meet around the world are good and want to help you. I think, I've heard that so many times and experienced it myself. But your big lesson about you have to rely on yourself, and you can rely on yourself. Like perhaps, you really realize that you needed to do all this stuff and you managed to do it, even though you must have been, in an awful mental space, but you managed to do it. That's, a really big lesson.
Yeah, and and that's 100% right. It's you kind of get a new renewed sense of self when you realize that you can do these things. And even if like the kind of overarching theme here is at the beginning I was beating myself up for failing at stuff. And then by the end of the trip, I had, gone through this whole ordeal and managed to get home. And so then kind of become the person that I needed to be to overcome that experience. And then after that, when I got home, obviously I had a whole new perspective on life and, how precious life really is. And that's kind of inspired me to go on many other adventures. And I actually went back and finished the part of the trail that I was doing a couple of years later, just to get some closure and, kind of be in that space again. Wow. So yeah, that's my story of a life-changing travel experience.
Dean and I did chat a bit further, and I've got another interesting kind of result of that story to tell you in another episode later. But he certainly did say that this experience absolutely shaped his life. He was 22 years old at the time, fresh out of university, and he's sure that his life would have been quite different if this experience hadn't happened. So you never quite know when it's going to be the big trip that changes your life. Now, my next guest today is Seng Mah, welcoming Seng to the Thoughtful Travel podcast for the first time. He's a photographer mate of mine here in Perth, and I have been asking him to tell me more about India, and this is one of his stories about India. There'll be another one later, but in this case, this is Seng telling me about, the big trip that really, really changed his life.
Just to give a little bit of context, I started traveling a lot later in life. I wasn't actually until I was 32 that I essentially kind of went on big travel adventures. So I was possibly about 10 years later than what most people would have done. My first big trip obviously was, a very long 3-month backpacking trip mainly around Europe. And I think that was life-changing in the sense that it was, it gave me an understanding about myself and the way in which I could actually act independently and be reliant on my own resources as well, and not stress out and panic when things, don't work. And just to sort of step back and put things in this perspective and just say, well, what's the next thing you need to do? How do you plan to move forward? So that was life-changing in a personal growth kind of a way. But that aside, I think one of the most amazing life-changing experiences I've had, which essentially just diverted the course of my life almost 180 degrees, was when I went to India back in late 2008 in November. And prior to that, I think most of my travel experiences have been primarily in Europe and a little bit around Southeast Asia. Again, I was born in Malaysia, so I returned to Malaysia, again, Singapore and Cambodia. And I think nothing can prepare you for India because you hear stories of people who've gone to India and they've either hated it or they've felt the siren call or the siren song to actually go back to India again. And luckily for me, I fall into the second category where I keep wanting, I feel a need to go back there and again and again, simply because there is something that India does for me that puts everything in my life into perspective. So I think in my first trip to India, you kind of almost ill-prepared, having, lived most of your life in a very westernized, developed world. I think there was a discussion on your group recently about developing and developed worlds, where things are fairly uniform here. I mean, you go outside, you go into town, you go anywhere in Australia, even to rural areas, and things look the same, things feel the same. Most people live the same kind of lifestyles. And when you go to India, you're kind of confronted by the face of humanity, I suppose, that's right at the coal face, without a lot of the perks of modern living, simply because there is no need for the perks of modern living in some contexts when you're traveling in India. I'm very hesitant to use the word poverty because I don't think it's poverty. I know there is a high level of homelessness and poverty in India, but the day-to-day lives that you see in places like Old Delhi and Varanasi, they're not poverty-stricken. It's just a different lifestyle, a lifestyle that harkens back, to a few decades ago, perhaps a generation ago, where, you don't need a lot of things to get by, and people that get by with very little need for a lot of the kind of perks of modern society. But I think one of the things that really took me outside of the comfort zone was just being confronted by so many different aspects of humanity. People still work very manually and physically there. For example, there was very visible visual evidence of homelessness and poverty that can be very confronting.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that it did for me basically was that it put everything into perspective and made me realize that a lot of the sort of things that we worry about living in Australia is really, in the scheme of things, absolutely worthless. I think they call it first world problems these days, obviously, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a bit more than just a meme, I think. I think it's more the fact that prior to going to India, I was working, I suppose, in a kind of government context, government sector, and was very clear in terms of the kind of career path that I wanted to take. And then 4 weeks in India completely changed that, as I mentioned, 180 degrees. And I came back and I had no desire to go down that usual kind of career-driven path, simply because I realized that it was really very empty. Right. I'm not sure whether that makes sense or not. It felt very empty.
Like there was not a real point to it, or not a.
There was no real point to it because it just felt very selfish, and I suddenly just really wanted to do work, I suppose, in a way that allowed me to kind of really just kind of connect with more people in a way that's more meaningful, I suppose. I think if you're just caught up in your day-to-day work, in your career, you're just cycling through much of the muchness across weeks, months, and years, and then so on and so forth. So that changed the way I kind of looked at the way in which I live my life, in a sense. So I basically just started kind of playing around with different jobs and eventually moved into the creative field, running a photography business. And then obviously now I'm teaching photography and taking people on photography tours, where I'm hoping through the tours that they can experience the same level of, I guess they can get the same sorts of experiences that I did. And hopefully that will be able to push a few buttons for them and get them to reassess their own values and things like that. So that was life-changing for me in India, simply because there were experiences that I had there which were very personal and very connected to people. It was really about local people in places like Varanasi, even in Delhi, in India, who were just sharing their lives with me and allowing me to look into the way they lead their lives, their philosophy as well. And I think that was incredibly empowering for me when I came back.
How do you, so often I hear from people who have, a very impactful travel experience, but then they come back and they're thrust into their normal everyday life and back in their job and so on. How did you find, did that happen to you to some extent, or were you so determined from your return from India that you were definitely going to change things, or how did that all play out?
It felt a bit more organic, I think. When I came back, it felt as if I had this kind of, and I know it's probably not the right term because it's almost a kind of consciousness expanding experiences, or just being a little bit more aware of the bigger picture, I suppose. So I stopped worrying too much about climbing the quote unquote corporate ladder. Basically, I stopped being ambitious when it came to driving a career. I basically made decisions based on what I wanted my life to be like, and went from there. So, I pretty much kind of quit my job a few months after I came back.
Oh, wow.
India, and changed the way I basically, because I was in a government sector, and it can be very kind of process driven, and it can be very, the internal politics. There are all these things that you worry about because of the dynamics that take place. Some people use the word, toxic workplaces that can apply in some large organizations like corporations in the government. And it was a little bit like that. So I made the decision that wasn't important for me. I wasn't going to play the game anymore because it wasn't going to go anywhere. It was making me a person that I didn't want to be post the India experiences. Yeah. So I made changes. So I was more in control of the kind of work that I did. And the people that I worked for, rather than trying to eke out a career path through this particular government organization that I was with. So that was important in that respect. And I think eventually that realization gave me the confidence to looking about 4 years down the track from 2008 when I was in India, to make the decision to basically leave working for someone else and creating my own business so that I could forge, in a way, the way in which I wanted to spend my time, the way I wanted to spend the hours in my day that was productive for myself and productive for what I wanted to do for others as well.
Yeah.
So that was what I meant in terms of the life-changing aspect of it.
Like I mentioned in my introduction, I think it's relatively common to have, kind of a big trip that does change your perspective on life. But I think it's also somewhat common that you come home and find yourself unable to action that once you're back in the quote-unquote real world. So that's why I was really keen to hear how Seng had managed that. And I think it's a good lesson. And I love how he has kind of combined doing work that he really loves as well as hopefully inspiring people to have similar experiences to what he had, so that they can also, kind of change their lives to be more aligned with, living a really fulfilling life and not just climbing the corporate ladder just because that's what you do. So really interesting stuff. Thanks for that, Seng. Now, that is it for episode 133 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. If you have had a big trip that changed everything, please come and tell me about it. The best way to do that is to join our Facebook group. It's called Thoughtful Travellers. You can find it just by searching for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook and requesting to join, or you will also find a link in the show notes. For today's show, the show notes are at notaballerina.com/133. Now, don't forget the sponsor for the show is Travel Journal School. And from mid-April, I'm going to be running the course Start a Personal Travel Blog. So come along to traveljournalschool.com and you can sign up to be on the wait list to find out the information about that. Thank you very much to Dean O'Shea. You can find him at Unbelievable Adventures and his website is unbelievableadventures.co.uk. And thank you also to Seng Mah for his first appearance on the podcast. He is at Venture Photography, and so you can find him at venturephotography.com.au. Once again, do come and join our Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers. We have over 500 members in there now and lots of really awesome conversations. It's always a pleasure to be chatting with people in that group. And other than that, I look forward to talking to you again next week. Thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.